Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we will be wrapping up the second season of The Boys. So I know that episode 8 of season 2 has taken multiple episodes, but guys, there was just so much to cover. We've also had a lot happen in the U.S. in the past several weeks. We've had elections, we've had contested elections, more elections because of contested elections and runoffs and such, and a lot has changed. We've had insurrection in the Capitol and all kinds of other somewhat bananas events that seem very similar to what The Boys was portraying. So this episode is highly relevant to the times that we're currently living in, especially in regards to the United States. So I do think that this particular episode warrants an extended review. So last time we left off with Homelander and Stormfront trying to coach Ryan on using his powers. Ryan was doing a really good job at trying, but he was getting very frustrated. And Homelander said that it's okay to try to maybe picture someone that you hate, that sometimes that helps. You can tell that he's speaking from experience, and he's doing his best to be a good dad. You can see that in some ways, at least, he does have true empathy for Ryan and this new experience of being a soup when this is not something that he asked for. Even if in this case, it is something that Homelander has kind of thrust upon Ryan through intentionally making him mad so that kidnapping him would be easy and he would go willingly with him. He's turned this kid on his mom, but that only lasts so long, as now a lot of the anger's fading as the new reality is kind of setting in as to what his world kind of looks like. He feels inundated with attention anywhere he goes if there's more than just a handful of people there. And while that's really discomforting for Ryan, it seems to be helping Homelander in really approaching this new job, I suppose, or this position as being a father. So he is trying. We'll give him credit for that. In regards to his character arc, I think that that's very interesting. And it reminds me a little bit of, people can be more than one thing, Joel. We all have really redeeming qualities at certain points. For example, there was a guy I used to work with, and he drove me absolutely bonkers with not doing his work and his flippant attitude on absolutely everything. Work-related, non-work-related, didn't matter. He'd bring it up. He would come in at like 8 a.m. and leave at 2. And everybody would just let it ride. But it's because he was leaving at 2 to go and pick up his son. And that guy's redeeming quality, for me, from my perspective, was that he was a great dad. Like, not just leaving early to go and pick up his kid and stuff. He was a great co-parent with his ex. He makes sure that his kid is into reading and reading fun things that he enjoys. He supports him in all of his hobbies and stuff like playing music and such. He's just all around a good dad. As crappy as he was as a coworker, and as frustrating as he could be as an acquaintance/friend, he's a fantastic dad. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing with Homelander here. He's by no means a fantastic dad. He's not even really a good dad. But you can see that he is trying with Ryan in ways he has not tried with anything else. Homelander feels like a god. And so I think that this episode in particular is really interesting as we see him seemingly genuinely apologize to Ryan for upsetting him and for the things that he's done in the past. And true to his word, he does not push Ryan again like he had before. He's telling him to maybe picture someone he hates instead. So he's trying to help him with getting his motivation and stuff, rather than just shoving him off roofs and seeing if he builds his wings on the way down. Now, while he's doing this, though, Stormfront's with him. Remember, they're dating and everything. And she tells Ryan that he has to learn this now. So she's now the one pushing Ryan. And that's unsettling for Homelander, especially when she says that he has to start learning to fight now to protect everyone against white genocide. And maybe this is the first time Homelander's really been paying attention to her in that regard. He's very swept up in his own crap, but I don't think she's used the outright terms like white genocide before. She has been doing like performative, conservative types of motivational speeches with him. They've been these public figures, and that hasn't been that weird for him because he's always been doing that. That's what they raised him to be. But now he's seeing that her agenda might not be entirely what he thought it was, and perhaps even Homelander draws the line at this kind of thing, because he definitely blinks a bit and changes the subject. It's off-putting to him in a way, and he cuts off that conversation right where it is. So I do think that that's very interesting, because Homelander doesn't care about anyone else. He's very anti anyone who's not a soup. And even then, he feels that he is Homelander. He's the Homelander, so he's above even all of the other soups. He's the original, as far as he knows and is concerned. So this is kind of weird, I guess, to him that she's drawing these other lines. For him, I don't think that he's an ally in any way. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that I think Homelander thinks so highly of himself as a god that he has never really put much thought into other things like racism, perhaps. And that's a symbol of white privilege. That's a criteria of it. You don't really seem to be thinking about it because you're never forced to. So this is a new form of awareness, perhaps, for him. He doesn't have any friends, so to speak, before Stormfront. He treats everybody else like crap. He makes A-Train murder his girlfriend, the woman that he loves. So I really don't think that he has enough experience with friends who are in these groups of otherness to really even consider their plight at all. He thinks everybody else is ants, and what is the plight of an ant to a god? So this is a little bit new to him, I think, in many ways. I'm sure he knows that racism exists, but I don't think that he thinks about it in any way at all. And I don't even mean meaningfully consider it. I don't think it even crosses his brain, his mind, really. Why would he, honestly? Because of who he is. That's not the type of character that he is. So this seems a little bit off-putting, to say the least. It's not quite jarring for him, but he does give her the side eye, and he's like, what? Wait a minute, where did that come from? So he does do what most people do when they're in uncomfortable situations with someone who's being racist or homophobic or sexist or any of those other ists. And he just kind of ignores it and instead changes the subject like it's Thanksgiving dinner. But it's not to avoid any confrontation. It's rather that he seems to be viewing Stormfront's conversation with Ryan as being irrelevant to the issue at hand. Because again, he only cares about himself. And by extension, because Ryan is of his seed, he recognizes Ryan as also being a god. Now, he likes Stormfront, but I don't think he holds her to the same regard that he does Ryan. So for him, he and Ryan are really gods. Stormfront is somebody he's really interested with, maybe somewhat enamored with, but she's really not on the same level as him and Ryan as far as he's concerned. I think that if we got to see this play out, that would become really apparent in the long run, and that he would choose Ryan. Homelander so often chooses himself, but in a lengthier story arc, perhaps one that's not limited to 8 episodes per season, or perhaps in the long run in future seasons, we might be able to see something like that. That could potentially be Homelander's redemption. If he gets one at all. Not everyone gets a redemption. This could be very BoJack Horseman, where Homelander's a terrible person and he doesn't get forgiven for it at any point. I'm also down for that kind of story, really for wherever this takes us. But I do think that it's very interesting, and that Homelander is really not trying to shut her up or cutting off that conversation because he doesn't want to expose Ryan to white genocide discussions. Really, he's cutting her off because he's like, what are you talking about? This is bonding time between me and my son. Why are you trying to make this about something else? He's not for a higher purpose. He is for himself. Homelander was raised for a higher purpose. And I think that her agenda and her trying to force that agenda on Ryan might eventually lead or have led to Homelander realizing that he was only part of her agenda in the long run. And him feeling used and lied to, we know from previous experience with Stillwell and Jonah, means that he is going to absolutely snap in a spectacular way. So that probably would not have been good for Stormfront in the long run. I don't think that she would have gotten what she wanted anyway. But so far, her harm's already been done, and that's where we're going to pick up here in a second. I just wanted to give you guys that brief recap. Brief is a relative term, I suppose. And get us back on the same page as to what we are talking about and why this is so important right now. Remember that when Stormfront was talking to Homelander about this, she said, you don't need 50 million people to love you. You need 5 million people to be pissed. And regardless of what happens to Stormfront at the end of season 8, she's already incited that violence in other people. She's made them feel that it's okay to do these things. So even once she's gone, that does not necessarily mean that the harm is going to vanish simultaneously. We've also seen that in things like former President Donald Trump deciding that he's not going to admit defeat and is instead going to maintain that he's still the president. He's still writing paperwork or having his people write paperwork that are referring to him as the 45th president rather than the former president. And that might seem innocuous, but there's a very clear school of etiquette to this when it comes to politics and former presidents and such. So this is very weird and unusual and suspicious, frankly, that he's doing this. But I think we're going to see something similar between what happens in The Boys Season 3 regarding what Stormfront has incited and what happens to that even in her absence, just as we are with Donald Trump's inciting treason and people storming the Capitol on January 6th, 2021. I think this show really started about, and the comic book, of course, in trying to have art imitate life, but it's really cyclical, to be honest. It's like a positive feedback cycle. I'm not saying that the art itself is feeding the violence, but that art and life kind of just seem to imitate each other. Even if that's not what's actually happening, it looks remarkably similar. And the visualization of it is striking. Living through it right now, having watched the episodes last year, and then seeing what all is happening right now, it's incredibly striking as we're seeing celebrity conflated with politics and leadership versus representation. And new propaganda machines laying atop ancient ones that have been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. We're going to go on a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Stormfront being outed as a super Nazi, Butcher coming clean with Becca about having cut a deal with Vought, and also how the Compound V release has been affected by Stormfront being outed as a Nazi. And we're going to do all of that starting with Stormfront being outed. Stay tuned.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were recapping where we left off in the podcast episode of The Boys Season 2, Episode 8, Part 2. So now we are on to what actually is happening at this point. So while they're at this cabin and Homelander's trying to teach Ryan how to use his powers and help him settle down after having been completely overwhelmed with the Planet Hollywood outing. And I do also want to note that it's very interesting that Homelander saw what was happening with Ryan and he immediately knew where to take him to. He didn't just take him back to Vought. He's like, let's go somewhere that's peaceful and quiet. And I would like to learn more, perhaps, about that place that Homelander took him. But we see that that's happening, and Stormfront's putting pressure on Ryan because she's telling him he has to fight against white genocide. And we see that this is the first time that Homelander really seems to be hearing her use those words overtly, or at least this is the first time he's been honestly paying attention, or that it's been in a situation where he's actually caring about something else to the point that this is a little jarring and off-putting. But while they're hanging out there and she's uttering this aloud, seemingly for the first time in front of Homelander, she's outed as a super Nazi and the wife of the founder of Vought on international television. Now, I'm assuming that this is international television, although the story mostly focuses on what it means to have power in America in different ways, in the United States of America in different ways. But I am saying international because at this point we also have soup terrorists around the globe, and I have a lot of friends who live overseas. In Tunisia, they live in New Zealand, they live in Australia, they live in the Middle East, they live in Brazil, not even necessarily overseas, but on different continents. They live in Canada, they live in the Philippines and such. And they are still aware of what's going on in the U.S. political system, at least in regards to these big things. And they'll message us and they'll ask, hey, are you guys okay? They'll be messaging me from Sweden and be like, hey, the Swedes are kind of concerned about the U.S. Or are y'all all right? Are you specifically all right? What's going on? So although in the U.S. we're kind of isolated, and I don't think that that's unintentional regarding a lot of news, it's not necessarily the same in other countries across the globe. They are aware of what's going on. So I don't know if you guys are aware that there's essentially a Brazilian version of Trump named Bolsonaro, who was elected in the past couple years in Brazil. But there are the equivalent of these types of characters, these people, across the globe. But we don't necessarily always hear about it unless you're seeking out that information by Googling it, by reading world news, or by talking to your friends who are across the globe. I'm sure there are countless ones I have no idea about who exist right now, but because of the nature of the United States, the nature of how it would have itself be seen, not necessarily how it is, the information does spread across the globe, and so people are very aware of that. So I'm going to say in this situation, even though the boys focuses on the U.S., that this is probably international news at this point too, especially since they're also movie actors, essentially, as part of their propaganda. Like, they're more than just celebrities. They are more than just superheroes. They are also business people and politicians. Like, they're in everything right now. They're more like lobbyists, but really lobbyists are who control the politicians and who have all the power anyway. Am I right? So we're seeing a lot of that. But as Stormfront has also been acting like this white power couple with Homelander out in the news, I'm sure that that's also been seen as well as this has been growing. Even if it's just people being aware of it on Tumblr and things like that. But while Ryan and Homelander are having some dad time with milkshakes or something in the cabin, this crazy loud sound goes off that's from a pile of Vought Sonic speakers in the woods. Like a huge pile. It looks like Billy and them knocked over a Radio Shack or something with all of these Sonic speakers. And that's probably exactly what they did, knowing Billy. But it seems that the Supes are super sensitive to them because they have super hearing. So they really did not enjoy these speakers. Who knows why Vought made them if they're going to be like that. But I mean, then again, it did take a lot of them to really get them over there. But it looks like Billy and them set those off to bring either Stormfront or Homelander or someone out of the woodwork to do what they need to do. Now, while this is happening and Stormfront's dealing with being outed and Ryan and Homelander are trying to have this bonding time, Butcher's coming clean to Becca about having to cut a deal with Vought to let her go if he radioed in their location so they could take Ryan back. He was all prepared to leave the kid there and trade him for Becca. But Becca asked him to promise her something. And I don't know if it was promising her specifically that did it, or because she asked him to promise on his brother Lenny's grave. And Lenny, aside from Becca, seems to be the person that he loved most in the world. One of those two things, or the combination thereof, have gotten to Butcher in a way that seemingly nothing else has. And he comes clean to her about it, and he's like, I can't do it. And so instead, he phoned Vought using the cell phone that Mr. Edgar gave him before, and left it in the cabin. So he set off that thing in the woods, then went in there into the cabin, and set that phone in there so that it would call Vought there instead. And he ends up taking the kid with him and Becca. And to Becca's credit, she tells the kid, hey, this is my husband. Because obviously Ryan's really upset and he's scared and freaked out. And he's like, what is this? Because he also has super hearing, so his ears are hurting. And Becca's like, that's my husband. Now, on the one hand, it's like, wait, what? You're just telling your child that's your husband? Your secret husband that you never told him about? He's supposed to roll with it, but, to Ryan's credit, he's like, okay, whatever, this isn't the time for it, I guess, and he just runs off with them. He knows that that's somebody that his mom loves and trusts, and Ryan loves and trusts his mother above all else. So for him, that is good enough. And I think that scene really speaks to the bond between them. So Billy himself seems to be afraid of passing along his generational cycles of trauma and his acquired trauma. Like, Billy had a lot of crap from his dad and losing his brother, and now he also has a ton of acquired trauma over the years from things he's done in battle, things that he's lost in and of himself by losing Becca and doggedly pursuing her for 9 years or so. So Billy has a lot of trauma, and that's the thing about trauma. As you get more of it, they can compound upon each other. And that's also something that AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, talked about last night, I believe, regarding the compounding of trauma from sexual assault and also the new trauma she's acquired from being under siege at the Capitol, hiding in another representative's office for over 6 hours in the dark and quiet while they waited to see if they were going to die. These insurrectionists, these treasonous folks who were storming the Capitol were going to kill her and everyone else who was in there. Now, that also makes me think about school shootings and the propaganda video that was at the beginning of, I believe, this episode. It was either this one or the one before. Okay, I checked my notes. It's definitely this one. So this episode opened up with Homelander and the New York City Sheriff's Office jointly producing a PSA about what to do if there's a school supervillain attack. And it says that they recommend that teachers have an approved or issued firearm. And that was in reference to Trump saying a couple years ago that he wanted to arm teachers to address the problem of school shootings. But in the case of supervillains, that wouldn't really work, right? How many times have we seen Homelander or Annie or Queen Maeve shot with high caliber rounds and then they are still fine later on? It might keep them down for a minute, kind of like a neck snap in Vampire Diaries, but it's not going to keep them down completely. And I think that PSA, when viewed that way, is partly meant to incite terror. It's meant to promote the firearm agenda, and it's also meant to underline again how vulnerable people are to attack. We see that with school shootings, we see that in The Boys with this narrative, and we see it with the recent siege on the Capitol. And that trauma can compound, and that's what's happened with Billy. Billy's not just angry because he's Billy. Part of that seems to be a trauma response. That is the safest way for Billy to be, but we know that he can be soft, and he is soft when he is with Becca. It's not necessarily his full and complete nature, his default setting, to be angry like that all the time. But when he's not with Becca, he is angry all the time. So we can see that part of it's circumstantial, but I think a lot of it is also a trauma response. And I'm sure that Ryan's going to have his own trauma after this too. But once Billy and Becca go and they get Ryan and they go to run off with them, and Billy leaves that phone there instead as a diversion, or maybe just as a middle finger to Vought. Could go either way. It's probably both, honestly, knowing Billy. They go ahead and leave, and they go back to the rally point that they were meant to meet up with Mother's Milk and Frenchie and everyone at. And they get there, and Billy tells MM to go ahead and take Ryan and Becca. He ultimately sacrifices ever getting to see Becca again in order for her to have what she's chosen consistently as her number one priority, Ryan. So Becca still chooses Ryan, and Billy still chooses Becca. It is heartbreakingly close to them being on the same page. It's pretty crushing, from a shipper's perspective, to be honest. it's really difficult to see Billy have so close to everything that he's wanted this entire time in his hands. The things that make him a good man, the things that allow the good in him to really shine, and having to let go of that to protect them. He's going to stay behind and try to fight off Homelander and Stormfront, knowing he's going to die, so that she can have Ryan. It's the most selfless act that Billy Butcher has performed in these entire 2 seasons. He was going to sacrifice a child before to get what he wants. And in this case, he did not sacrifice Ryan because he wanted to be nice to Ryan for Ryan's sake. He chose not to sacrifice Ryan because he knew that that's not what Becca wanted and that she would never forgive him if she found out. And he still came clean to her about that. And I respect the heck out of that. Many people never come clean about the types of things that they've done that are especially selfish. You know, things like cheating, that's selfishness. Things like doing weird things out of jealousy and possessiveness. But Billy was upfront about it, and that is very remarkable in my personal experience with fellow human beings, and it's also very admirable. But as much as it is those things, it's also just as heartbreaking. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to see what happens when Homelander finishes with those sonic radios or sonic speakers and gets back to the cabin where he left Ryan. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about Billy's choices. I'm super proud of our boy from a personal growth perspective, but I am also heartbroken for him in this situation. A lot of times, doing the right thing means it's gonna hurt, and he still chooses to do the right thing anyway. So he is staying there to keep an eye on what's happening with Homelander and Stormfront and stuff, while MM goes to help Becca and Ryan escape. So he's standing at this little covered thing. I'm not sure what it is. It looks like a culvert cut in half, honestly. Like one of those big semicircle things that are elongated, meant to, I don't know, keep military supplies or something out of the rain. I'm not entirely sure what the thing is called, but you get where I'm coming from. I figure if you're listening to this, then you have actually watched the show already, and you already know. So Billy's hanging out there, and Homelander, on the other hand, is walking into that cabin that's full of Vought SWATs, and he hears them say Billy's name. They're like, "Where's Butcher?" And he is very displeased. And he's not even immediately slaughtering them. He's quiet angry. This man is like livid. He notices there's a whole bunch of Vought SWATs there, and his child's not there, and they're saying Billy Butcher's name. So he closes the door slowly behind him and traps them all inside with him. It reminds me of Rorschach from Watchmen just a little bit, although he's not in jail. But pretty much, you're all locked in here with me. And he slaughters them all. It is a truly bloody mess. Homelander is always a messy person who lives for the drama. And I mean that in just all the ways that he can orchestrate drama, but also in just straight up murdering people and imagining murdering people. But this is truly exceptional in his rage, in Ryan being taken from him. He absolutely loses it there for a minute, but it's like a very calm second before the storm when he unleashes everything on these people who, they have guns and stuff. What's that going to do to Homelander? It's almost a joke that they have these guns. Also, the fact that they show up as a SWAT team with guns is kind of confusing, knowing that they can't harm Homelander. But I imagine Mr. Edgar knows that the boy was with Homelander. And I'm not entirely sure what Mr. Edgar thought was going to happen in this particular situation. The guns are just confusing to me. Maybe they thought they were going to have to fight Billy. I don't know. But it's just weird. But it does help with the beautiful cinematography of, Homelander going off on all these people, and there's like blood going everywhere, and, the flashes of the muzzles and stuff from the firearms. It's very masterfully done. So while that's happening, Becca, MM, and Ryan are heading out. And as they're pulling the car out of there, Stormfront arrives, and she plows that car off the road. Just with her body and stuff and her powers. And Billy and Frenchie immediately run to them as Annie and Kimiko confront Stormfront. Now, I grew up on a farm, so this might sound kind of weird to you guys, but there's a thing in livestock rearing that this reminded me of. So, when you have goats or sheep, and you have a big flock, a lot of times people will get these livestock guardian dogs. You have the option of getting those, or you can also get like mules. And mules can take out some animals. I've seen them like fight a mountain lion and stuff. They are wild with how aggressive they can be and kind of how protective they are of that area that they share with the sheep and the goats and such. So you wouldn't think it, but they are hardcore. The other thing that you can do is you can get livestock guardian dogs, and that's the route most people tend to take. You have a lot of choices with livestock guardian dogs, but when I was growing up and I had goats, I had Great Pyrenees. So I had a 150-pound fluffy white dog named Jillian, and Jillian was magnificent. She was gorgeous, she was ginormous, and very much possessed of her own mind. That's the thing about a lot of these big guardian dogs. They don't follow orders a lot. They do what they want to do. Sometimes that aligns with what you want them to do, but their number one priority, ingrained in their instincts, is to take care of their flock. Now, these animals, the Great Pyrenees, tend to be a lot more nurturing, I guess, and attentive. They can still fight wolves and everything. If you have one Pyrenees, it can help stop the wolves, but it's going to die in the process. If you have two, then one of them or both of them might be very injured, but they can generally kill the wolves and handle the attack. There are other types, though, like the Anatolian Shepherd, and people pair these dogs up a lot. Anatolian Shepherds are a little bit more aggressive, shall we say, and if you pair the two types of dogs together, and you have two Great Pyrenees, and then you have two Anatolian Shepherds, if there is a wolf pack or a bear or something else that is large and going to harm your flock, or numerous and going to harm the flock, the two Great Pyrenees will drop back and protect the flock itself. And the two Anatolians will charge forward to go and take the wolves away from the pack and take them on their terms. So that's kind of what this scene reminded me of because of my upbringing, I suppose. And I always thought that that was such a beautiful display of teamwork. The dogs don't really seem to bark at each other or anything to communicate that. They just seem to have an understanding that you two are going to go back and we two are going to go forward, and that's how we're going to handle this division of labor and tackle this problem. So that's what we see happening here with Billy and Frenchie running up to help MM and Becca and Ryan. And then we see Annie and Kimiko charging forward to fight Stormfront. Now, I also really love the way that this is done. Annie is not necessarily a very aggressive person. She would normally, in my head, be more like a Great Pyrenees. But because she actually has powers, the boys don't quibble over this at all. Of course, Billy's not going to at all, because Billy is caring more about Becca right now. And Frenchie is charging forward, probably to help his buddy out. He's going to check on MM, but he's probably also worried about the kid. Frenchie has a big heart, and he also seems to be a feminist and is very supportive of women. He knows Annie and Kimiko are able to handle this, and he's going to go and do what he's able to help with best, which is to get these people out of this car and make sure that they're okay. I'm sure he has some type of experience in field dressing wounds and stuff too, if he needs to. And Billy is going to be out of his mind with freaking out about Becca and maybe panicking a little. So this is the best choice for all of them. Kimiko is definitely going to charge Stormfront because Stormfront is the racist who killed her brother. So she's been itching for this fight the entire time. And Stormfront, in typical villain fashion, is asking questions and dialoguing with them instead of just fighting it out. So she's saying, what about the truth? What is the truth? And it's very philosophical, and it's also very Trumpian. So she is saying, there are all kinds of truths. That's an alternative fact, essentially. What's the truth? The truth is what we make it. Essentially, that philosophy that people in power are the ones who get to write the narrative. Whether that is, that the history of war is dictated by the victors, or just that narratives are what you can get people to believe. And then that can become its own truth in that it is their personal value, their personal truth, even if it's not an actual fact. Because there is a difference between fact and truth in a philosophical standpoint. So Stormfront is definitely, dialoguing too much when she could be, mostly kicking their butts right now, I think. She is 1-on-2, but she's been lasered by Homelander and is just like, yes, thank you. May I have another? So this is probably not going to bother her all that much. Kimiko is super strong, but mostly her thing is brute force. If Stormfront were to keep mostly to the air, I don't think that Kimiko would be able to do as much. Now, she is able to jump super high, but Stormfront can fly. So if she were able to just stay up in the air, then she would only have to fight Annie, and that would be 1-on-1, and she would have the high ground over Annie. I'm sorry, I had to put that Star Wars joke in there. I couldn't help myself. But, Annie has her powers, but they also rely on having energy to draw from. I kind of wonder if she's able to draw the energy from Stormfront herself, or from, Stormfront's lightning discharges, because it seems to be related to electricity specifically, like electrical power, in a way. I don't know, she was able to run it off of things in that car when they got the car going, but when the EMP hit the van back at Stormfront's creepy compound, she wasn't able to use any of her powers. So there's that. I wonder if that would also disable Stormfront, though, since a lot of her seem to be lightning-based. I'm not entirely sure, but the musings took me there. Kimiko's powers regarding being super strong and being able to jump and everything don't seem to be limited by that same type of issue. So perhaps if the boys had just hit them both with an EMP, then Kimiko could have taken her out super easy. That is simply my perspective. It would have disabled Annie too, but it's kind of like a Queen's Gambit, to be honest, which I think would fit in very well with the narrative of the season of girls get it done, which is what Vought was pushing and was using as a tagline for that new movie. I also recently watched The Queen's Gambit on Netflix, and it was very good. It's not sci-fi, but it was very good, and then I had to Google a lot of chess stuff, because I was like, what is a gambit? Well, it's essentially when you sacrifice a pawn, or you sacrifice a piece on your board in order to gain a later advantage. So that's what I'm arguing for right now, and I'm calling it the Queen's Gambit, because it's all the ladies fighting. So as they're in the middle of this, they didn't do My Queen's Gambit. I think it would have made more sense, but I digress. I mean, Annie would have recovered from it eventually, and Kimiko could have torn Stormfront limb from limb in absolute magnificent fashion. Or at least I think she would be able to. Stormfront doesn't seem to have the healing powers to the extent that Kimiko has them. At least we've not seen many of them die. Like, Annie didn't even seem to be close to death, just really solidly knocked on her butt and temporarily incapacitated. But even Huey was not seemingly upset at the idea that she would be dead. He wasn't afraid she would be dead. He was just like, oh God, you hurt her. That's like really messed up. You didn't have to go that far. And Butcher's like, yeah, I did. So we've only seen Kimiko, I think, really die and come back. And I can't tell if she's supposed to be somewhat of a combination of Beast and Wolverine. Most of these characters seem to be like composites of other characters. And, you know, like Homelander, he's Captain America and he's also Superman. So it seems that, from my perspective, that Kimiko might have exceptional healing ability, because it seems that Black Noir really did kill her and she came back. She has like maybe Wade Wilson or Wolverine levels of healing. It seems to surpass that of the others. And Stormfront seems to be similar in that regard too, where, you know, Homelander can laser her and she's fine. Now, we've seen Maeve take bullets and stuff, but we've not seen any of the others really get lasered, so I can't tell if Stormfront is, you know, more durable than the others, or if she's just kinky, honestly. But we saw Homelander unload like an automatic weapon into Maeve's chest in season 1, I believe, and didn't really do much to her at all. It took a super high caliber round to really take down Annie, even temporarily. So I'm not entirely sure what the limits of their powers are. And one of my favorite things to do is to stack up superheroes against each other and be like, hey, who could beat who in a fight? I know we all do that if, you know, you love superheroes too. But I feel like I need more data. I should probably just go through and read the comics to get all of that data. But now that I've started the TV show first, I'm not sure if I want to skip back into that yet and potentially ruin a surprise. I don't want to spoil anything for myself, to be honest. I have to be very careful not to. But I'm sure I'll probably see something spoiled on like the Boy 7 posting on Facebook or something, or Compound V posting. I'm in a lot of those types of groups, like the Stargate Indeed posting and stuff like that, Rick and Morty Swift posting. So I have to try extra hard not to find spoilers, but so far I've done pretty well. So I don't think I'm going to take it upon myself to do that with the comics until maybe after I've finished it. I don't know. If you guys have read them simultaneously, or you read the comics before the series or started watching them while you're waiting for season 2 or something, I would love to hear about your experience with that on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can do that through the GSMC Sci-Fi one, or you can hop on over to one of my live streams on Twitch under the name Sharknado Week. That is spelt like Sharknado and then week, but with 3s instead of E's. We have a lot of debates and AMAs on there regarding science and sci-fi, and I would love to hear from you guys at length about your opinions on those things. Otherwise, I'm just sitting here talking to myself, right? So, I do think that it's interesting how they have paired up these characters to go and confront the issues, and I love that Annie and Kimiko are taking on Stormfront, even though Stormfront is really kicking their butts quite a bit, or at least holding her own, up until Queen Maeve also shows up. Girls really do get it done. So Maeve does finally show up. She has really been picking herself for most of this. Not even picking herself, because she wasn't even with Elena. She was trying to protect Elena from Homelander. Honestly, it's more like she picked Elena the entire time, even when she wasn't with her. It's like picking her meant not being able to be with her, just like how Billy has chosen to choose Becca by respecting what Becca loves and wants most, and he chooses her by choosing not to be with her. So I think it's really interesting how Billy and Queen Maeve's plot lines have really converged here, especially since we don't really get to see them talking at any point. I'm not sure I've seen Billy and Maeve in the same room at all. Like when the Deep and Homelander and Annie and A-Train went after the boys with that giant fiasco with the whale, where Billy drove a speedboat through a whale. I don't remember Maeve being there, probably because she's still upset about Elena leaving her and stuff, and had just descended into a den of debauchery, and was, just having different dudes and stuff come by, which, no judgment. Everybody's got their own coping mechanisms, but Maeve was just smoking a lot of pot and trying to bury her feelings in sex and drugs. So, that seems pretty Maeve, sex, drugs, rock and roll. But, she has had quite a character arc the last 2 seasons, and she started standing up to Homelander more on behalf of others, not even on behalf of herself, although it is ignited by seeing parts of herself in Annie that really does it. So Maeve has finally stepped out of that role of being the passive white moderate, as we discussed her in the context of Dr. Martin Luther King and his speeches in one of the previous episodes. And now she's decided, I'm going to be an active participant in this terrible world. I'm going to be conscious about this. I'm aware of the things that are happening, and now I'm going to do something about it. She's chosen to become an ally. Maeve has said, enough is enough. I'm not going to be under the thumb of now not only Homelander, but also Stormfront. Like, really? An actual super Nazi? Like, I'm not going to call her a neo-Nazi because she's not new. She's ancient, really. Well, not really ancient, but she was already alive when the Nazis were a thing in the 40s and everything, and then was made into a super soldier. So she has been around for quite a while. She's not a neo-Nazi. She's been a Nazi the entire time and is an old school Nazi. So this is not acceptable to Maeve anymore. She's seen what Homelander alone can do, and that's a man without any real agenda other than being selfish in and of himself. He's like Donald Trump like that for the most part. He's just selfish. And Stormfront, on the other hand, is, in my opinion, more dangerous because Stormfront understands the game that's being played, whereas Homelander, Donald Trump, are kind of oblivious to it. They're not really in it for those same reasons, whereas Stormfront has an actual agenda, and she's what I refer to as being a true believer. And those are the people who I think are more dangerous. They understand the game. They know how to play it. They know how to win it. And it's like Game of Thrones for them. You win or you die. Stormfront is our Cersei Lannister in this type of situation. And so I think she's way more dangerous, and Maeve is not doing this anymore. I was very proud of her for her finally taking that step forward. We're going to go on one more quick break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap up this episode and this season of The Boys by talking about how this battle between the girls has turned out, and also this situation that Homelander, Becca, and Billy find themselves in with Ryan. Stay tuned.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how Queen Maeve is stepping forward from her role as the white moderate and not doing anything about the injustice that she sees around her. She may not have all of the power in the situation, but she has significantly more, and she is finally stepping into her own power. She's been dealing mostly with her physical power, which has always been unquestioned, but now she is taking more of a socio-emotional and mental power. She is using her willpower at this time to make a difference in her own life and in that of others. So she showed up to this fight, and Billy and Frenchie are checking on MM, Becca, and Ryan, whom Stormfront has blasted to the side, and Homelander's over here slaughtering all of the Vought SWATs in the cabin that he took them to. Now, I'm not sure how long it takes him to kill all these people. Probably not long, but he probably also enjoyed it because he was so angry. However, that anger was about Ryan being taken from him, and he knows that they probably could not have gotten far. Remember, they were still able to find the body of Translucent at the bottom of the sea. Granted, the Deep had to do it, but it was because of Homelander and his ability to see through everything except for zinc, I do believe, that they had to put the body at the bottom of the ocean to begin with inside of those zinc-lined cases. So they're running out of time right now. This was not going to help them get very far to begin with, and now Homelander knows that they're missing, and he is angry, and our guys have been pulled up short in their escape. So this is bad news bears for the boys. At this time, though, Stormfront manages to peel out from this battle she's having with Maeve and Annie and Kimiko. Everyone's gotten their butts thoroughly kicked in this, while Stormfront also got her butt kicked but still held her own, but she manages to peel out of there, and she finds where Becca and Billy and Ryan are running away in the woods. They're going on foot by now, and Frenchie and MM, I think, are dealing with, maybe trying to help Annie and Kimiko and perhaps Maeve, or, everybody just still recovering from the car crash and such. But Billy and Becca and Ryan have parted ways with the rest of the boys, and Billy's running away with them instead of them going separately. He's decided nobody can protect them like he can, and so he goes with them. But Stormfront catches up to them, and Stormfront starts strangling Becca to death up against a tree. She hates Becca for so many reasons. None of them, I think, are to do with jealousy, though. Stormfront, I don't think, cares enough about Homelander to be jealous of Becca, but she's definitely angry, and she's taking her anger out on Becca, because Becca is an easy target. And Billy's unable to get Stormfront off with a crowbar or a gun. We've watched him beat another soup to death before. He beat Mesmer to death in the bathroom. And now that I think about that, as long as Mesmer stayed dead, I would say that that means that not all of them have the healing powers to the same degree, or perhaps some of their powers are weaker in them than others. So perhaps Mesmer, just had those really strong mental powers, but not any of the healing. So maybe Kimiko does have exceptional healing powers. And perhaps Stormfront does too. Maybe Annie does as well. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's because they're part of a newer generation too, and Stormfront had access to all of those goods over the years to maybe enhance herself with that compound V after the initial testing. But we do see that she is not able to be pried off. And Billy is super strong. He's super brutal. He empties that clip into her. He tries to beat the crap out of her with the crowbar, but he's not even like a gnat, really, to Stormfront. And this is really the crux of everything for Ryan, as he hates her. You can see it as he sees Stormfront strangling his mom to death. You can see that engaging from earlier, where Homelander told him at the cabin that it helps sometimes if you imagine somebody that you hate. And you can see the hatred in Ryan's eyes as this woman is killing his mother. And Ryan finally manages to use his lasers intentionally for the first time by thinking of someone he hates, who's right in front of him, Stormfront. And he blasts her just before Becca blacks out. But it's his first time using it. And like a lot of superhero narratives, your first time using your powers doesn't often go all that well. And tragically, that's what happens with Ryan and Becca. And when he got Stormfront, he did get her real good. She's not coming back from it as she bleeds out there on the ground. But unfortunately, he nicked Becca too. He wasn't even trying to kill Stormfront. I think he was just trying to knock her off of it. I don't think that Ryan's ever seen the lasers in action before. I don't think he's necessarily seen Homelander use them against another person. He might have thought it would be more like a psionic blast or something. But unfortunately, it does hurt Becca. And also Stormfront. And while we're used to this amount of brutality from the series in general, this is really shocking for this kid. Becca made him put money in the swear jar if he said he hated anyone or anything. She's not let him watch anything violent. She's not had him exposed to any type of violence at all because she was afraid he would turn out like Homelander. So the fact that he's just effectively used his powers for the first time and consequently killed both Stormfront and Becca at the same time, this is a huge blow to him. And it's funny now, kind of. Not funny, ha-ha, but situational funny that Billy was concerned about protecting Ryan from his own demons this entire time, his own trauma, because Ryan has just acquired a massive ton of his own. So as Becca is laying there dying, and Billy is crying and focusing entirely on her, she tells him, that the kid didn't mean to and that he's a really good boy. And her last dying wish is to ask Billy to take care of the kid for her. Now, this scene, you guys, was so heartbreaking. I don't even know Becca that well as a character, but I do like what I know about her. But I was more heartbroken for Billy because he has worked so long and hard to save her He believed when everyone told him it was crazy to believe, and he continued looking for her. His love for her is that strong. She was his entire raison d'être, his reason for being, and she was his purpose, his meaning in life. And it's something that Nietzsche has said. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how. And in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, he refers to that often. He says those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. And that's particularly relevant to this too, because Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who was in Nazi concentration camps in World War II. And he wrote about his experiences in there and about how you can find meaning or purpose anywhere, but sometimes that means that you have to intentionally cultivate that for yourself. With the heavy Nazi imagery of season 2, I feel that that is exceptionally relevant. It's also relevant to where we are as United States citizens right now, and it's especially relevant to where Billy finds himself now. He had his why to live, and so he could bear almost anyhow. He was living in a sewer with the other boys and stuff. It was like an underground dungeon looking thing. But he has had a meaning. He's had a purpose in his life, and that purpose was Becca. And now everything, his why for living, is gone. And Becca gives him a new one because she knows he can't break a promise to her. He couldn't promise her that he would also protect Ryan when he had said to Mr. Edgar that he was going to sacrifice the kid. Once he promised Becca that he would save the kid, he had to come clean and had to go ahead and do everything in his power to save the child, even if that meant losing her. And it ultimately does mean losing her. He'd already accepted it was going to be permanently when he sent her off with MM, and then he, maybe for a fleeting moment while they were fleeing through the woods, thought that he would finally get to have her too, and he was able to reconcile being there with the kid. And then she was ultimately permanently taken from him, like in an inalterable way. So it's really heartbreaking from my perspective for Billy, but it also is Becca showing her love for him by giving him another reason to live. I don't think she's just trying to save Ryan with this. I think that she's also trying to save Billy because she knows that this will do it. Homelander then shows up right around this time as Becca has just died. And he quietly asks Ryan, "Did you do this?" when he sees Stormfront's body. And the way that he asks it is really unsettling or disquieting. It's kind of like Ryan broke an expensive vase or something. And poor Ryan's small, "I didn't mean to." Oh man, my heart. Oh, right in the feels. He did not mean to kill her, even though that woman was killing his mom. He was strangling her to death at the time. He still feels bad over having, mortally wounded her. Stormfront's still alive, but she's dying. She's in the process of dying at this point. And it's very clear. Like, she looks like full Anakin Skywalker, really. At the end of episode 3 is what we're looking at. And poor Ryan, who's not been exposed to violence his entire life, has now accidentally killed the person that he loves most and the person that he thinks his biological father loves most. Now, not much matters to Billy anymore, but his word to Becca is all that he has left of her. And so that means that his new purpose and meaning in life is now to protect Ryan and to prevent him from growing up like Homelander, to prevent another Homelander from being created and taking this away from other people. I don't think Billy's really thought it that far through. All he is thinking is, I made a promise to Becca. This is what it is. So Homelander tries to get Ryan to come over to him, but Ryan looks really scared, and he circles around to standing behind Billy. So Billy chose Becca, and Becca chose Ryan, and Ryan chose Billy. That's the part of Becca that is inside of him. And if it hadn't been for Ryan, then Becca would have chosen Billy. And we're saying that perhaps this kid has his mother's instincts in him too. He has her kindness and her compassion and her softness. And I think that Billy's recognizing that in the kid too. So that is not really making Homelander very happy, but at the end of the day, that's who Ryan is picking. And this might have turned out a lot differently had Maeve not shown up and gone, hey, you're not doing this anymore. I'm making a stand here. You're going to leave me and Elena alone. You're going to leave that kid alone. And you're going to stop being a holy terror to everybody. Or else I'm going to show everyone this footage of you ordering me to let this plane go down and letting them know all of the terrible things that you've done. Like, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag. The only thing that you love is being loved by other people because you only love yourself. So that is the best thing that she could have done. That was her chess move in that situation, was to just call him on loving himself above all else and seeing what he did with it. So on the other hand, we also have seen that Compound V's release has been put on hold due to Stormfront's outing as a Nazi and how hard she was pushing for it. Let's be honest, it is somewhat of a eugenics movement. It's transhumanism at its base, right? So it's trying to, give humans powers. It's trying to make humans more than what they are right now. And you can read more about transhumanism and stuff online if you're interested. Or if you like that concept in sci-fi, check out Orphan Black. Very similar premise. But because now it's associated with Stormfront, and Stormfront as a Nazi, and the basis of it, of this whole thing being in eugenics, is revealed, now it's considered to be very bad press and problematic. So Mr. Edgar is now having to put this on hold. By the end of this episode, though, Billy is also the one who ultimately restores Annie's belief in a higher power, which is interesting, as you get to see all of these threads tied up for these characters. The fact that Billy was capable of making a selfless decision out of sheer love for his wife, and in effect giving up a lot of himself in the process, really means to Annie that there has to be a higher power. So she was having this crisis with her faith this entire season, but she's reconciled it with the help of Billy, which you really don't necessarily see coming. You also get to see this really cute scene between Ryan and Billy at the river while they're waiting for Mallory to pick up Ryan for protective custody. So they're talking a little bit about Becca, and Billy has, this necklace that had been Becca's, and it's like a St. Christopher medal or something like that. It's supposed to be a protective one, and I do believe it's Catholic in nature, if I recall correctly. And he ends up giving it to Ryan. And he's like, your mom used these to watch over me the whole time that we were separated. And now she's going to watch over you with it too. And it's freaking adorable, you guys. Like, you don't expect sweet displays like that from Billy. And he still does it in his gruff manner. But the feeling behind it, especially since it's one of the last things he has left of Becca, is really moving. And I think that by placing that token of the last thing he had from Becca alongside Ryan, he's giving it to Ryan, so now they're both in the same place, that it's symbolic, because Ryan is also the last thing that he has of Becca. So, like a dog chasing a car, what do you do once you do catch up to your goal? Think about all the messed up stuff that Billy's done in trying to find Becca. I'm sure he was also hard as it necessitated before because of his history with his dad and, you know, having lost his brother and stuff, that childhood trauma, that generational trauma was still there. But think about all that other acquired trauma he's attained while he's been trying to find her. So now he doesn't have that goal to seek out anymore. So now he's just left with the remnants of what he's done, the ashes of everything around him. And he has to decide what to do going forward. I also really love Billy's advice to Ryan during that heart-to-heart. Apparently they'd had a heart-to-heart before this one on the riverbank too. And he told Ryan not to be a C word. I thought it was pretty funny and pretty on point for Billy. Also, it's just kind of hysterical to hear the kid say that. I'm not going to say it because I'm not sure what age all of our listeners are. But you know which one I'm talking about. If you watch the episode, you know. It was cute and it was funny. And it implies that they had had at least one earlier heart-to-heart. Now, Grace Mallory does arrive to pick up Ryan for protective custody. And I think that sending him with Mallory was a great choice. Having lost her grandchildren, Mallory is going to protect this kid to the utmost. She's also very well connected, and not only was she able to get protective custody for the kid, but she's also let Billy know that all of their charges against the boys have been cleared, and they can now go back to their families. Family's been a really important theme throughout the entire series, but particularly in this season, as we've gotten to explore what family means between these individual characters with each other and within their own personal families that we don't necessarily see on screen. We've gotten to explore Annie's relationship and reconciliation with her mother, Huey's history with his mother who left him and his father. We've gotten to explore not only Billy and Becca and Ryan, but also Billy's history with his dad and his brother. We've gotten to see having a heart-to-heart with Grace Mallory about their kids and grandkids and families and how family at the end of the day for them is the most important thing. Billy's whole search for Becca was about family. The boys in general being together is about found family. And it's been really heavy on it this season. I'm not even covering all of it in that recap. But when Mallory says to Billy that they can all now go back to their families, Billy turns around and he walks away. And that made me so sad. He doesn't necessarily have anything to go back to if the rest of his family is walking away to their families, right? So MM's returning to his wife and daughter. Frenchie and Kimiko leave the basement home for the last time and turn off the lights on the way as they leave together. And hopefully Maeve gets to go back with Elena. I think that a lot of healing has happened between Huey and Annie too. And it just makes me really sad as he sends the last part of the woman that he loved off with Mallory, and Billy is essentially left alone now because they're no longer all united by this common enemy that they're fighting. Sure, Homelander exists, but Maeve has kind of muzzled him, at least temporarily. And now Billy's alone and he has no one. The only purpose he has is to make sure the kid's taken care of. But for him, the best way that he knows how to do that is not to keep the kid with him, but rather to send him with Mallory for protective custody. So that makes me a little heartbroken for Billy right now. And then we also see Homelander touching himself in the moonlight with his pants off atop a giant building as he repeats that he can do whatever he wants and just yells as he does that in the moonlight atop this giant building. Being atop a building like that reminds me a little bit of Jessica Alba's character in Dark Angel. I mean, she didn't do anything like that, but she was always sitting atop the Space Needle. It also reminds me of course, Batman, things like that. A lot of those superhero panels where it's just them staring off into the night or the day, the dawn sometimes, of the cityscape laid out before them. But I like how they've perverted it with Homelander doing what he's doing. because that's what he's all about. He's about himself. We also see Goran Viznik's character having a call with Victoria Newman, and as he pops like his 43rd fresca of the season, his head explodes, and we see her on the sidewalk outside of his home, or his office, wherever the heck he is, staring at the window where his blood has splattered all across it. And it's then that you really are getting it nailed home that Victoria Newman is very likely the daughter or granddaughter, either or, of Stormfront. Clearly, it could have gone anyway. I'm not sure, because she was already an adult in the 40s, right? With World War II. So this could be a granddaughter, a great-granddaughter, or just her daughter, because it seems that you don't age that much when you have that compound V, at least not with whatever regiment that she has been on, she being Stormfront in the situation. So it's very interesting to see this AOC character of Victoria Newman being the very person who was exploding all of these heads around her. And I'm sure there's a metaphor in that too, but I'm talking about more so that she's just killed all of these people and is acting like she's not part of the system when she is. Now, I'm not sure that it's supposed to be explicitly like AOC, or more so just part of the political machine, really. I view it as this being something that Stormfront was trying to fight overtly, and that her daughter or granddaughter is fighting more covertly. So I think that Victoria Newman's very much on her mother's side, and that's why she's angry with Goran Viznik's character and everything too. And that she's going to continue trying to further her agenda in Vought, but by convincing people the other way, instead of making 5 million people pissed at her in the way that her mother or grandmother Stormfront did. She's going to try to convince them through the other route, like being a white moderate, essentially. In this case, she's not really a moderate. I think her character is supposed to be more radical, but by claiming to be fighting for those people, to be their advocate, to be their ally, she's going to, commit subterfuge in that way. And we're going to see more of her coming forward, I believe, because Huey, at the end of the episode, goes to Victoria's campaign hub to get a job with her to help take down Vought, quote, the right way, unquote. As though politics is the right way to do anything, am I right? But just kidding. I'm sure it has some type of purpose. But he says that he never really felt he fit in with the boys, and he wants to do this right, as I suppose someone's convinced him politics is the right field to fight against systemic problems, even though that's generally part of the problem. I'm not sure. I think that we need to fight fights on all fronts. And that seems to be what Stormfront and her daughter were doing. And poor Huey, I don't think, has quite gotten that point yet. That Billy has his own place in this fight. So does Huey. If he chooses to do politics, that's fine. Everybody fights the fight in their own way with the gifts that were given to them in the best ways that they know how. Huey's now been through so much carnage, he wants to do it this way. And she welcomes him in, with him having now identified himself as feeling largely different or misunderstood by most of his inner circle. He's thereby also identified himself to her as being very vulnerable to outside influence. I'm very creeped out by it, and it seems like this may definitely be very poison pill amendment type of thing. And we hear Only the Good Die Young playing again, recapping everything with that Billy Joel cherry on top. So in the end of this season that culminates from 2 years of these characters' experiences, or 2 years for us, for them I'm not sure how much time has taken place, we see that finally Maeve makes a stand. Becca still chooses Ryan. Billy still chooses Becca, but this time for her sake instead of his. And that's an act of pure love on his part. That's growth. Surprisingly, Ryan chooses Billy over Homelander. And unsurprisingly, Homelander chooses himself. And Annie returns to Huey and her faith. And those really may end up being one and the same. Thank you for sticking with me through all of these episodes. I hope you've enjoyed them as much as I've enjoyed talking about them, and I'd love to hear from you guys about your thoughts. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to the show, and writing a review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.